30 years have passed, but some love stories never fade. They live in memory, they whisper in silence, they return when the heart least expects them. This is not just a reunion, it is a continuation. The fairy tale that once began on the streets of Los Angeles is ready to face the weight of real life. And now the world will see if love can survive not only time, but change. Vivian Ward had once been a woman who carried laughter in her eyes, a spark in her voice, and a kind of courage that made her unforgettable. In the years since her world turned upside down, she had built something no one expected, an empire of her own. She was no longer the young woman who stumbled into love by accident. She was a woman of power, of independence, with her own name. Glowing in golden letters across magazines, business reports, and charity headlines, Vivian had taken what she learned in her unlikely journey and transformed it into something lasting. From small beginnings, she rose, first helping others find dignity, then creating a foundation that gave women second chances, a voice, and a future. Yet even success could not silence the quiet ache that sometimes stirred when night was too long and memories became too heavy. For Vivian, the fairy tale had ended in a way that no one had predicted, not with tragedy, but with distance. She and Edward had once promised to rewrite the rules of love, but time had rules of its own. Years had passed, careers had demanded, and choices had carved new paths. She had not forgotten him, not for a day, but she had learned to live without him. Or at least she thought she had. Edward Lewis was no longer the ruthless corporate raider of old. Age had not dulled his mind, but it had softened his edges. Where once he had torn companies apart, now he built them, investing in ideas that gave back more than they took. The man who once lived for power now lived for meaning, and though his name remained respected in high towers, he often found himself standing alone in rooms filled with applause. He had wealth, he had recognition, but when the lights dimmed, what he had most was silence. It was not by fate, but by inevitability, that their lives collided again. A gala in the city, bright chandeliers spilling light across marble floors, voices blending in polished laughter. Vivian stood there, radiant in her quiet confidence, her presence enough to command the room. Edward entered later, his hair silver, his eyes carrying the weight of history. For a moment time folded upon itself, and in that crowded room filled with strangers, the two of them saw only each other. The world around them seemed to blur, but reality struck just as quickly. She was not the girl who once looked to him for rescue. She was her own force, her own story, and he was not the man who once lifted her into a fairy tale. He was a man searching for a place to belong in hers. Their eyes met, a flicker of recognition, and then hesitation. Neither rushed forward, neither spoke at first, because sometimes the hardest words are not the ones you never said, but the ones you said long ago and can't take back. That night ended with nothing more than a polite greeting, a forced smile, and the weight of unfinished history pressing between them. But neither could shake the feeling that their story was far from over. Vivian returned home with her thoughts restless, replaying old laughter, old promises. Edward walked back to his penthouse with silence heavier than ever before, and so the next chapter began not with passion, not with fire, but with tension. Because after 30 years, love does not start with a kiss, it starts with a question. The second meeting did not happen in a ballroom or at a glittering event. It happened in the daylight, unplanned, in the chaos of a city street. Vivian was leaving a board meeting when she saw him across the avenue. He wasn't in a tailored tuxedo this time, nor in the sharp armor of the past. He was simply Edward, coat open, expression lost in thought, unaware of her gaze. For a moment she almost let the crowd swallow her, almost turned away. But something inside her, something raw and unfinished, pulled her steps forward. "Edward," she said. Her voice was steady, though her heart betrayed her. He looked up, startled, and when his eyes found hers, years melted away. Vivian! Just her name, nothing more. Yet in that one word there was history, apology, longing, and fear. They walked together without speaking much, letting the rhythm of the city guide them. Finally, they stopped at a quiet corner cafe, the kind of place neither of them would have chosen before, yet it felt strangely right now. There were no cameras, no lights, no expectation, just two people with years between them and questions. Unspoken, the conversation began with politeness, as if they were strangers reacquainting themselves. He asked about her work, she asked about his. She told him of the women she had helped, of the stories she carried like treasures and scars. He spoke of changing business, of using wealth for purpose. They smiled at the small overlaps, winced at the distances. Yet beneath it all, a current pulled at them both, a truth neither wanted to face. At one point, silence fell, heavy and sharp. Vivian looked at him, her eyes searching. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. Edward hesitated. "Which part?" "Walking away when we could have tried harder, letting time decide for us." Her words were soft, but her eyes were steel. He leaned back, exhaling as if the question had lived in him for decades. "I regret not being the man you deserved then. I regret thinking love was something I could control, something I could schedule between boardrooms. But I don't regret you, Vivian, never you." Her lips trembled, just slightly, betraying emotions she had long buried. "You left me to figure it all out on my own. I became stronger, yes. I built my own world. But sometimes strength is just another word for loneliness." The cafe was too small for such words, too fragile a place to hold such weight. Yet there they were, peeling back years of silence. Each word a cut and a healing at once. And still, the world was not waiting for them to mend. A flash outside the window, a camera, a tabloid scenting something it could not ignore. Vivian stiffened, Edward noticed, and suddenly the past collided with the present. The fairy tale was not theirs alone anymore. It was property of the world. Remembered by millions, demanded by headlines. "Some things never change," Edward muttered, bitterness lacing his tone, but Vivian shook her head. "No, some things have to change. I won't let them write my story again. If we try this, Edward, it won't be a secret, it won't be perfect, and it won't be easy. I need you to understand that." Her words were fire, a challenge wrapped in warning. And for the first time in years, Edward felt something stir in him that was not guilt, not regret, but hunger, the hunger to fight for something real. They parted that day with no promises. Yet when she turned to leave, Edward caught her wrist gently, almost afraid. "Vivian," he said, softer now, "I don't want another 30 years of silence." Her eyes met his, unreadable. "Then don't give me silence. Give me truth." And with that, she walked away, leaving him standing in the echo of her footsteps, knowing that their story had been reopened not neatly, not sweetly, but with the raw edge of reality. That night, neither of them slept. Vivian sat at her desk, staring at old photographs she once kept hidden. Edward stood at the window of his penthouse, city lights blinking like questions with no answers. Both of them realized the same truth. The fairy tale was not over. But this time it would not be written in glass slippers and roses. It would be written in scars and choices, in the terrifying honesty of who they had become, and somewhere deep down, both knew the hardest chapters were yet to come. The storm did not wait for them to find peace. It came fast, loud, and merciless. By the following week, Vivian's face was splashed across magazine covers. Her name whispered on talk shows, her every movement dissected by hungry reporters. "The pretty woman returns." Vivian and Edward, the sequel nobody expected. Headlines turned their private reunion into a public spectacle, painting stories they had not lived, inventing motives neither had spoken aloud. Vivian had fought too hard for her independence to let the past define her again. She had built a name beyond the fairy tale, yet here she was, reduced once more to someone's fantasy headline. Sitting in her office, she stared at the morning paper. Her face smiled back at her in glossy ink, but the caption beneath screamed, "Still chasing the fairy tale." She closed her eyes, the words slicing through her armor when Edward called. That morning, his voice was firm but weary. "Ignore them. They don't know us." Her silence was heavy. "They didn't know us then, either. But they made me into someone I wasn't. And now, after all these years, they're doing it again." There was a pause, a hesitation. And then Edward said the words she both dreaded and longed for. "Then let's show them who we really are. It sounded noble, even brave. But the reality was messier. Every step they took together invited flashbulbs. Every whispered conversation caught the attention of curious eyes. Business partners questioned Edward's judgment, while Vivian's foundation donors sent polite but pointed concerns. The world loved their story, but it wanted it in neat chapters beginning. Romance, happily ever after. Life was never that neat. One evening, at a fundraiser for her foundation, the pressure broke the surface. Vivian delivered her speech with poise, her words sharp with passion for the women she helped. But as she stepped down, she caught Edward, watching her from the crowd. His eyes held pride but also fear. Not fear of her strength, but of losing her again. Later, away from the crowd, he said, "You're magnificent. But every time I see you on that stage, I realize how far I drifted from you. I let go once, and I don't know if I could survive letting go again." Vivian looked at him, her face soft but steady. "I didn't survive it, Edward. I carried it like a wound even when I pretended it healed. If we do this again, it can't be about fear, it has to be about trust. And trust means honesty even when it hurts." He nodded. But honesty had a way of cutting deeper than expected. Days later, a past secret surfaced, an old photograph, an old connection Edward had buried in silence. It was nothing scandalous, but it was enough for Vivian to wonder if silence would always be part of his love. She confronted him not with anger, but with exhaustion. "Do you know what silence feels like, Edward? It feels like abandonment dressed as dignity. I don't need perfection. I need truth always." Edward struggled, torn between his instinct to protect and the demand. Too open. For a man who once measured life in numbers and contracts, vulnerability was still the most foreign language. But for Vivian, it was the only one she could accept. The tension grew, pressing against them from all sides. Friends cautioned her, colleagues warned him. Whispers of "too late" and "don't risk it" grew louder. Yet in the stillness of night, both found themselves replaying the same memories, her laughter in the penthouse, his hand reaching down from the fire escape. The past had not died. It had only gone quiet. And then came the moment neither expected. Vivian received an invitation to speak at an international conference, an opportunity that would take her across the world for months. The timing could not have been sharper. Just as the chance to rebuild something with Edward was emerging, life demanded she choose again between her independence and her heart. When she told him, his face faltered. "So this is goodbye again?" She shook her head. "No, Edward. This isn't goodbye. This is the test. If we've really changed, if we're really stronger than before, then distance won't break us. Not this time." But in her private moments, doubt gnawed at her. Could love survive time once more? Or would the fairy tale finally close, not with fireworks, but with silence? That night, Vivian stood on her balcony, the city lights spread before her like stars she could never touch. She whispered to the night, words Edward would never hear. "Don't let me believe in this if it's only meant to break me again." And somewhere else, across the same city, Edward poured himself a drink, his reflection in the glass older, wearier, but still haunted by the same woman. "Don't let me lose her twice," he muttered into the empty room. The stage was set. Love had returned, yes, but so had fear. The question lingered in the air, heavier than ever. Would they finally write their own ending, or let the world write it for them? The flight was booked, the speech was written, and Vivian's departure was marked on calendars across the world. She was to leave for Europe in 3 days, a journey that promised recognition and influence, but also threatened to fracture the fragile thread reconnecting her to Edward. In those days before she left, the city seemed alive with whispers. The press speculated wildly, some claiming their romance was rekindled, others calling it an illusion of nostalgia. But beneath the noise, Vivian and Edward wrestled with something quieter and far more dangerous, the truth of who they had become. The night before her farewell event, Edward asked to meet. He chose a rooftop garden above the city, a place secluded yet open to the world, a strange metaphor for what they shared. Vivian arrived in a dark coat, her hair pinned back, her face unreadable. He was waiting by the railing, the city stretching below them in endless lights. "Why here?" she asked softly. He gestured to the skyline. Because from up here, everything looks small, and I wanted us to see how small the world is compared to what we've lost. Vivian's lips curved into a sad smile. That's the thing, Edward. We didn't just lose something, we became something else. And sometimes who we become doesn't fit who we once were. He turned to her, eyes searching, desperate. Don't say that. Don't tell me 30 years were only meant to end in silence again. I let you go once because I thought love was supposed to be perfect, untouched by flaws. But now I know love is all flaws, all broken pieces. And I want yours, every scar, every truth, every hard edge. Her eyes glistened. She wanted to believe him, to fall into that old gravity, but she carried too many ghosts of disappointment. You talk like a man who's ready for love, Edward. But love isn't talk, it's action. When the world presses in, when my voice is louder than yours, when I choose a path that doesn't include you for a time, will you still stay? Or will you vanish into silence again? He stepped closer, the city hum rising beneath them. Then test me. Let me prove it. But before she could answer, the rooftop door opened. Paparazzi had found them. Flashbulbs burst like gunfire in the night, shouts filling the air. In seconds, the sanctuary was broken. Vivian froze, the old panic rushing back. She turned to leave, but Edward caught her hand. Vivian, look at me, he demanded, voice steady against the chaos. She did. For a heartbeat, it was just them, no cameras, no headlines, no history, only two souls who had loved and lost and found each other again. Then, instead of pulling her away, Edward did something he never had before. He spoke the truth not in private, but in front of the world. He faced the cameras, held her hand high, and said, This is Vivian Ward, not the girl from your fairy tales, not the woman you've written about. She is stronger than your headlines, braver than your stories, and she is the love of my life. If you want me, you get her. If you want her, you respect her. Because she is not yours to write anymore, she's her own. The crowd roared with questions, the flashes relentless. But Vivian's eyes filled, not with fear, but with something. Warmer, something that felt like freedom. He had done the one thing she needed. Chosen honesty. Chosen her in front of everyone. Later, when the frenzy passed, they found themselves alone again, shaken but changed. Vivian's hand lingered in his, not because she needed his rescue, but because she wanted his presence. For the first time in decades, it was not about fairy tales or rescues, it was about two people who had survived time and were willing to fight for what remained. The next day she left for Europe. Edward did not stop her. He kissed her hand at the airport, eyes soft, voice steady. Go, do what you were meant to do. I'll be here when you're ready. And this time, Vivian, I won't disappear. As she boarded, Vivian felt no fear of distance. For once, she did not have to question if he would wait. For once, she knew the truth had been spoken, and the silence between them had ended. Weeks later, standing before thousands in a grand hall overseas, Vivian delivered her speech. She spoke not just of empowerment, but of love, the kind of love that does not demand possession, but gives space. The kind that does not silence, but listens. And as she spoke, her eyes drifted to the first row, where Edward sat quietly, smiling. He had come, the applause thundered, but she only heard the quiet promise between them. Their fairy tale was no longer perfect, no longer simple, but it was real. And this time that was enough. As the lights dimmed and the audience stood, Vivian glanced at him once more. No words, no grand gestures, just a shared understanding that their story, against all odds, was still being written, and perhaps that was the truest ending of all. Not a rescue, not a goodbye, but a beginning that finally belonged to them both.